Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another 461 essay video. It's been a little bit, but excited to get back into it. Today we're going to be talking about the cardiovascular system, and we've got a lot to talk about, but it's going to be awesome, so let's get into it. It's raining where I'm at, so hopefully it's not super loud. But we're going to talk about first action potentials in the heart. Now, we've already talked about action potentials in skeletal muscle, and so now we're just going to translate over what we learned to the heart now, because it's going to be a little different because the heart can beat on its own, but also uses similar muscle buildup with sarcomeres, and so we're going to see similar ions and movement and distribution and things like that. But it can also beat on its own, which is very important so that you don't have to think about your heart beating. You don't have to constantly remind your heart to beat, which is incredible. Imagine if you just had to constantly be like, beat, beat, beat. That would take so much brain power. Thank goodness that you don't have to do that, because I'm sure that everyone would die all the time because you would forget. I mean, heck, people forget to brush their teeth every morning, but imagine if you just forgot to beat your heart one day. Could be deadly. So, we have two types of cells in the heart. We have one cell that we're going to call our autorhythmic cells or pacemaker cells. And we're going to be looking at their action potentials here on the left, and also called our pacemaker. They're going to set the pace of the heart. And then our cardiomyocyte, or kind of just the cells that make up the bulk of our myocardium, or just the muscle, or contractile cells. It's going to be the same name. Oh, I was saying one thing and then I spelled the other thing. So, cardiomyocytes. Okay. So if we zoom in on our autorhythmic cells, actually we're going to do cardiomyocytes first. Cardiomyocytes, as you can see here, this is the action potential that I have divvied up into different colors and sections to kind of look at it a little bit deeper. We still have a time and millivolts axes, but we have our resting membrane potential, which is represented as the number 4. Phase 4 of this, and a phase 0, which is our depolarization. Phase 1, which we're going to call rapid repolarization. Phase 2, which is going to be called our plateau phase. And then phase 3, which is going to be our repolarization. Some of these phases are very familiar, like our resting membrane potential, depolarization, and repolarization, but we're seeing some new phases here, like our rapid repolarization and our plateau phase. Those are new, right? We haven't seen those kind of phases before. But we're using very similar ions. So if we dive into this, phase 4, we're just using the same kind of channels that we were using before. We're just using potassium leak channels. So potassium is what is permeable here, all those great things. Then during phase 0, we're going to be using the exact same ion that we used before with our voltage-gated sodium channels. That's going to cause our depolarization there. But where it's different here, this is where we're going to see a lot of change and a lot more added differences. Now, in order for the heart to contract in the way that it needs to as like a functional syntonym, as like one unit, it sends ions through gap junctions, and there's several ions just going through all the time, right? And we're going to just have a change in charge always. And so we're going to see kind of this weird instance where we rapidly repolarize, but we have these calcium channels that start to open at threshold, and then they finish opening, and this causes because we also have voltage-gated potassium channels that also start opening here at threshold. And voltage-gated potassium channels are really, really slow opening, and obviously voltage-gated calcium channels open a little bit slower, but potassium's going out of the cell, right? making the cell become more negative, repolarizing the cell, but then calcium's going into the cell, making the cell become more positive, depolarizing the cell. And we get this equalization of charge here, which is pretty interesting that we don't really get to see anywhere else. So we have here at the top, we're going to have our voltage potassium channels start to open. Then again with that, we also have our voltage chloride channels also start to open. And then we have calcium induced chloride channels as well. Then we're going to have some L-type, which is just long-lasting voltage-gated calcium channels, along with a new channel that we've never seen, which is going to be a IKVR. Then we're going to have an IKR, then an IKS, and we're going to see an IK1, or IKI. Eventually, it'll get us back down to our resting membrane potential, where we'll just go back to our potassium leak channel. And that is our cardiomyocytes. If we translate over to our autorhythmic cells, these ones are the ones that are telling our cardiomyocytes what to do, kind of the leaders of the gang. And we have something different that happens here. What we've always seen with our skeletal and now our cardiac muscle is that at threshold, what opens is our voltage-gated sodium channels. Here, what's interesting is that, first, to translate this over, we still have those same phases. So phase 4 is below threshold, phase 0 is when we're depolarizing, phase 3 is when we're repolarizing. We just lose phase 1 and 2. That's why it goes in a little funky of an order. But here, what we see is something different. We open up our voltage-gated sodium channels when we get below threshold. So these are going to be our voltage-gated sodium channels. And they're not voltage gated, but they're just like slow opening voltage or sodium channels that allow the cell to reach threshold quickly. We're going to call these HCN channels, or funny channels, which are literally just sodium channels. And these ones are so cool because it allows the autorhythmic cells to constantly just come back and back and back to threshold once and once again, over and over again, is what I meant to say. Over and over again, without you having to think about it, without any stimulation, because these just open right when you get below threshold, which is super fascinating. Then if we've already used a sodium channel, we would have to use a different ion in order to cause depolarization. And this is where we're going to bring in our awesome little calcium channels. And we're going to have both types here that are going to cause this. So our calcium channels, we're going to bring in our T and L type calcium channels here. Then it's super simple. On the way back down, we're just going to use our potassium, voltage-gated potassium channel. And those are going to be your action potentials, which is so fascinating. Beautiful. Next, if we move on to our EKG, this is kind of we're tracking what the action potentials are causing. So we're tracking how they're impacting the heart, and we're just kind of putting it on a graph to show us really what's happening. So here, as you can see, I drew out a little heart with some different colors on it, and then I drew out a little graph over here on the left. And on this heart, I have a negative little circle over here, and then a little positive circle over here. And then, yeah, I have little, like, lines all throughout with little weird fibers and stuff like that. But then we have this whole weird little line. Well, what on earth does this mean? Well, several things. This is super important. An EKG, or electrical cardiogram, is just literally measuring the action potentials of the heart. We're just putting it in the graph, or in a graph. What we're measuring is we put these little, what we call leads, on someone's chest in order to measure the actual electrical activity. So we measure how it's depolarizing this way. We can also add more leads going this way and all around like that. There's usually around 12 leads, but just for this exercise, we're just going to be looking at these two going from negative to positive right here. Because our heart depolarizes from the sinoatrial node all the way down and then up around like so, to kind of cause that contraction to occur. So what we can see here is that we have 5 different waves that are part of this. We have our P wave, our Q wave, R, S, and T. Great that they put it in alphabetical order. It works great. So our P wave is going to represent our atrial depolarization. Our QRS complex altogether represents ventricular depolarization. But if we break this down, our Q wave represents specifically the superior portion of the ventricular septum. The R wave represents more of the Purkinje fibers. And then the S wave represents the exact supralateral left, so many words there, this green section, so supralateral left section of the ventricle. Because that one just takes a second, has to go back up, and then it's going, since right here you may have noticed that some are going up and some are going down. What we are tracking is the direction that they're going towards. So right here it's going mainly towards the positive, and since we're becoming more negative, negative going to a positive is going to read as going up. But since here at the Q wave we kind of wrap around, we're going more towards the negative, that's going to cause us to go down. Negative towards the negative is going to cause us to go down. Then in our Purkinje fibers, we're just going to see a more strong vector going this way, and that's going to cause us to go up even higher because that one's super strong. And then when we come back around, we're going to have a tiny wave going down. Oops, not septum. Beautiful. So then our T wave is now representing our ventricular repolarization. And now all throughout the heart, as we were depolarizing, we were always going from epicardium, oops, not epi, we were going from endocardium to epicardium. But now with the repolarization, now we're going to go epi to endo. We're just going to change the direction because it's becoming more positive. It's now going positive to negative, and that's going to become, what is going to make it go up. And that's your EKGs. Next on our list to talk about is going to be our NSTEMI and STEMI. Now, what this means is that we're having essentially blockage in, so this is like the left ventricle wall with like blood supplying it. And we have some different problems that can occur where right here, as you can see, I drew a little blood clot. If this causes the ventricle to have general hypoxia, what's going to happen is that we're going to see an upside down T wave. And that's because if it has hypoxia, we're going to see a change in how well it can depolarize and repolarize. And when it's repolarizing, it's now repolarizing opposite from what it should, and it's not repolarizing in the same way, and it's going to cause the charge to be opposite, and then it would cause it to be upside down. Now, if there's a bigger clot and it has moved a little bit further down, it's occluding more blood. Sorry, on this one right here, we've like cut off some of the inferior portion of this, but it hasn't crossed the whole wall yet. It's just crossed some of it. There's still blood getting there, but there's some places that have lost it. This is what we're going to call an NSTEMI, or a non-STEMI. And then if we have specific hypoxia where it's completely cut off bottom of it, that's going to be called a STEMI. Now, we need to be able to identify the different ones that can be found on an EKG. So, NSTEMI, STEMI. If we have an ST depression, like this one shows right here, where your ST segment is lower, what's happening is that we have, already there's a current of injury that has increased the baseline, changed the baseline just from what it was. But what you notice is that the T wave is still there, but this is just very, very low. And that's going to tell you that this is an NSTEMI. Next, we also have, if we have transmural weakness, so it's crossing the entire membrane, then we're going to have an ST elevation. This will also still change the baseline. It's going to decrease it. But we're going to have an elevation here in the ST, causing it to be super high to where it shouldn't be. And that's going to go with your STEMI. Beautiful. Next, we have a couple different parts of the autonomic nervous system that we want to talk about, how it innervates our cells. And we have two parts of this. We have with our autorhythmic cells, and then our cardiomyocytes or contractile cells. Okay, perfect. So, we want to look at how it's going to be impacted based upon like a sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system response. So if we're having a sympathetic nervous system response, the drug that's going to act the most is going to be epinephrine. What this is going to do is it's going to stimulate a just part of the cell called adenylyl cyclase. And adenylyl cyclase is going to increase and when we increase CAMP, that's also going to increase pKa. And pKa is going to go and do some things, but it's specifically just going to decrease threshold. And an increased CAMP would also cause our HCN channels to open, which would increase, I didn't write this though, increase slope of phase 0. And then these HCN channels would increase the slope of phase 4. So that right there, epinephrine, right, is doing a sympathetic nervous system response. And if we increase CAMP, these are all going to cause a sympathetic nervous system response. The end result there, what happens, is going to be an increased heart rate. Now, if I did a different color for our parasympathetic, let's go with like this blue. What's happening is it's going to go over and inhibit adenylate cyclase, and that would decrease CAMP, right? And that would cause an increased threshold and a decreased slope of phase 4. It would also have these subunits from not alpha but beta and gamma that would go and activate a GERK channel, which is going to be a potassium acetylcholine channel, and it's going to cause hyperpolarization. And all of those together are going to cause a decreased heart rate. So, this right here, this is sympathetic, and this is parasympathetic. Now, for our contractile cells, or just our autorhythmic cells in general, these are going to have very similar responses. So let's go through it. First, we're going to have, if we have our sympathetic response, epinephrine is what's going to cause this. And it's going to do a few things, right? It's going to also go back to our adenylate cyclase. And this is going to, if we do this again in purple, it's going to increase CAMP. It would open our voltage-gated sodium channels, not sodium, that's potassium. No, calcium. Letting more calcium into the cell, and would also cause pKa again to be released. And pKa would cause, do the open of the channels, cause phospholambin to do something that I quite don't remember, and stimulate calstapin to stimulate RYR. Then it would also stimulate our troponin to let off calcium right there. So all those things right here increase calcium, causing inotropy, which is cool. Then, if we have any other response, what we're going to see is the circuit pump, increasing the activity of the circuit pump, and our little trifecta right here is going to increase lusitropy. Perfect. Next portion that we're going to talk about is going to be our cardiac excitation coupling. And this right here is what we talk about when we're kind of comparing the neuromuscular junction to how it fits in cardiac muscle. So, imagine that we've got calcium sweeping down the T-tubule, and it's going to enter into our L-type calcium channel, allowing calcium to just flood in. Now, calcium is going to do two things. It's going to come down, and it's going to start binding to its like calcium binding sites on troponin, but it's also going to come and it's going to bind to our RYR. It's going to act as a ligand, allowing the calcium that's here in the sarcoplasmic reticulum to exit. So we have calcium from two sources now. We have extracellular calcium and intracellular calcium. And that's going to allow us to have contraction, which we should already know what that looks like, cross-bridge formation, and all of those things. then we'd have that subsequent relaxation. Then we want to get our calcium back in through those two separate ways because we need it back where it was. And so we're going to put some back in through the circuit pump. But then we're going to use this new channel called a sodium calcium exchange right here. It's going to put 1 calcium out for 3 potassium. Not potassium, sodium. Oh my goodness. And then we're just going to use our old bestie, our sodium potassium pump. And this is what's creating the gradient. And that's going to be our primary active. And then this one's going to be our secondary active, which is great. Now, for our final part of our unit, we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle is super intricate and super awesome, but it kind of just goes over all the pressures, volumes, EKG, heart sounds that you experience when talking about the heart, specifically the left side of the heart, because we care more about that one because it's going to the whole body and is important. So I'm going to just break it down and we're going to go through it. Right here, we've got pressures. We're going to be looking at 3 pressures: aortic, ventricular, and atrial. Now, the aortic pressure is just coming from the aorta, right? And the aorta is a large artery, and arteries have high pressure. So, the aortic pressure is going to start high and stay high. It receives blood in one area, so that's going to increase the pressure there, obviously, because it's receiving more blood. And then we're also going to see it have like a repercussion area, and we're going to see an increase in pressure there as well. So, if I was tracing this out, we're going to see it be high, receive blood, repercussion, down. Now, we just have to compare that to our ventricular volume, which the ventricle is always trying to overcome the amount of pressure in the aorta in order to eject the blood. Same thing as a ketchup bottle. You have to push it hard enough in order to eject the ketchup out of the bottle to eat it with french fries. So, ventricle, right here, it's going to increase a little bit just because of receiving blood here from the atrium. It's going to expand just a little bit. Then, during isovolemic contraction, this is where it's increasing in pressure because it's like gearing up, it's prepping, it's getting ready to eject. Then it has to overcome the pressure in the aorta, eject the blood, and then we're going to just relax, cool down. Relax as the volume has been ejected. Then it kind of stays low again, and then we do that same whole process again. With the atrium, it looks just a little bit different, right? Because here is where it's actually contracting during atrial systole, because it contracts at different times than the ventricles. And then we see a repercussion here too, because here it's receiving pressure because of the ventricle. Because the ventricle just contracted and it snaps those papillary muscles that are attached to the chordae tendineae and then attached to the bicuspid and mitral valve shut. And that's going to cause this little wave hump thing right there. Next is going to be our volumes. We're only going to be looking at ventricular volume here because that's really the one that we care about, because atrial volume will just go straight into the ventricle. So, if we start right here at isovolemic contraction, iso means same and volume means volume. So this is going to be staying at the same volume during contraction, which makes sense because right here we're contracting, we're increasing in pressure. But right here we're staying at the same volume. That just means that we have to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze until something pops, right? And then once it does, we eject the blood, decrease. Then, right here again, we've got isovolemic, so that means that blood can't go anywhere, so it's staying the same, and it's going to be at the lowest value here. Here's a good point to bring up, that right here, this is going to be your end diastolic volume. So at the end of diastole, that's the value that we're looking at. And then right here is going to be your end systolic volume, so the value at the end of systole. Then we have 3 phases where we really just refill the ventricle. We have two phases that are passive, where the blood isn't being pushed, it's just falling right in. And then one phase that is active. And then it does the whole cycle again. If we look at when valves are opening and closing, we can see that we have two areas where no valves are open, and that's going to be our isovolumic phases, which makes sense because if the blood volume isn't changing, then there's nowhere for it to go, which is great. So right at the beginning of isovolumic contraction, we're going to have our mitral valve closed because the ventricle just finished refilling with blood in preparation for contraction, because we need to build pressure here in order to eject the blood. Then, right at the beginning of ejection, this is where the aortic semilunar valve opens because we overcame the pressure there. Ejects the blood, and then we close that valve too because that valve is very pressure sensitive and it's only open for this short time. Then after that happens and we have this short period of time again where we can have no problem, I guess you could say, we then refill the blood because the mitral valve is open. Then we can add in our EKG, and we already talked about what all of this means, but since what word am I looking for? Depolarization has to happen right before contraction. We're going to see that the P wave happens right before atrial systole. Then that QRS complex happens right before ventricular systole. And then that T wave happens right before ventricular diastole, which makes super sense. The last thing on this list is talking about heart sounds. And what we're hearing with heart sounds is just the valves closing. So we're going to hear a lub right when the mitral valve closes. We're going to hear the heart sound dub when the aortic semilunar valve closes. And those are our two main heart sounds. We also have a heart sound number 3, which we're going to call a murmur or a sh sound. And this is usually heard at the beginning of diastasis or at the end of rapid inflow. And this can happen because of the hardening and stiffening of the muscles in the left atrium. It's not left atrium, the left ventricle, because of heart failure and an increased muscle mass there. And we can hear a little murmur because it's refilling and it's causing them to expand a little bit, which is crazy. We can also hear this, hear a sh in different places. So if we hear a lub, sh, dub, then we're hearing probably a problem with the mitral valve. But if we hear a lub, sh, dub, then we're probably hearing a problem with this valve being narrow, or not valve, this opening being narrow, like the aorta being narrow or the pulmonary trunk being narrow. If we hear a lub, dub, sh, then we're probably hearing a problem with the aortic semilunar valve, all of those things. So we can just kind of pick and choose how we want to. Obviously, a patient can pick and choose, but we can learn from that to see how well we're doing. So, that is going to be it for our Essay 1 of Unit 3 this week. And I think we got through a lot of material in a reasonable amount of time. So, hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that was good. Hope you have a great rest of your night. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.